All right, we are live for another week of Organics Q&A. How you doing, Brandon?
Busy, man. Busy. A lot going on. You and I talked about it a little bit yesterday, but prepping for the spring veggie garden, and we're both a little bit behind. And I finally, knock on rocks, have gotten past this root aphid thing. And man, I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. What a pain in the ass that was, but a lesson learned. And it took me 20 years to break those protocols, and at my age, I'll be dead before I break them again. So,
yeah, I saw Kyle Cushman just posted something on Instagram that he had root aphids too.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm just
poor guy.
Past it, and knock on rocks. I'm going to continue to use Bovaria and the Metarhizium and a couple other things just to be safe, because you know me, I'm overly cautious and I really want to be careful about that. And I do send out cuts to people, and you and I have also had this conversation a lot. I definitely am devoted to being part of the solution, not part of the problem. So I would rather hold off on sending something to somebody or miss a sale completely than to hem somebody up. So I'm doing my due diligence, but really excited to have turned the corner on that. And I've also just, because I'm an idiot and I just can't help myself, I did just get a whole bunch of new genetics in seed form. And so I got some stuff I'm really excited about. I got that grapefruit, the BC grapefruit that Justin McGill loves so much, which could hopefully replace the one he's got, because the tissue culture didn't turn it around. It still has the weird growth.
Weird. Yeah, I don't like it. I'm growing it right now, and it's not the same grapefruit that I remember from 15, 20 years ago when we first were growing it. So
fingers crossed that works. I popped some, quote unquote Meigs County. We'll see what that actually turns out to be. That's pretty highfalutin talk there, if they really think they got the real thing. Obviously there's, the name game is weird. Lots of stuff gets called whatever, but there was a Meigs County gold that was, hallucinatory and unbelievable. I doubt that's what I've got. I popped those Alaska Thunderfuck 77 seeds I got from a grower, which I'm super grateful about. What else am I popping?
So let me ask you this before we get into it, because I'm not a genetics guy, and I've been pretty clear that like most weed hits me the same. What's the deal with all the older genetics? Do you think it's that these old genetics are actually better, or do you think that it's just that you have this nostalgic thing? It'd be like, I can't think of something like I might have enjoyed as a kid that I'd go back and rewatch a cartoon or something because it has a good memory for me. What do you think it is?
I think it's a combination of factors. I think there's, you can't discount nostalgia. If I was smoking it on Dead Tour and having a great time in '88, then I probably, or 90.
Yeah.
Then in my head, I'm like, oh, that was good weed. And maybe I just had a lower tolerance. Maybe I was just having a better time. I was young and everything didn't hurt all the time. So nostalgia definitely could play a part in it. For me, the reason I chase older genetics, and my buddy Paul and I talk about this from time to time, like if I'm looking at the family tree and it's a really long one, I probably don't want that unless it's just absolute cup winner, desert island strain cultivar. The reason being is because I like to play with genetics, and so I like to have the original building blocks, and I can put together what I want to put together. But as far as chasing particular experience or high, I think we're all in agreement that we've got this horrible genetic bottleneck based on folks chasing high THC, purple, triked out plants. Everybody wants a certain visual. I love what Tony and Dave from, Budgelero say, who cares what pretty's got nothing to do with weed. What was Frank Zappa? There's a lot more of us ugly motherfuckers than you pretty boys. So, so watch yourselves. And so, I don't care what weed looks like. I remember all the best cultivars when I was younger. They were pretty ugly. There weren't any nugged up cookies looking, cultivars. There weren't. And so, I'm chasing nostalgia. I'm chasing what I consider to be a more nuanced and have a broader range to palate, experience, all those things that we're looking for. But yeah.
Yeah. And I'm not, this is a little out of my area of expertise, but I will say one of the things that Jeremy Plum would talk about is when trying to compare, experiences, how weed hits us, how we feel about it. A lot of it came down to, from the research that they did, was that a lot of it was the environment you're in. So if you're in a cool like you're on the Dead tour, that weed experience you're going to have is going to be a lot better than if you're, I don't know, at home getting yelled at by your significant other, have a kid screaming at you, whatever. Like
Right.
So environment plays a big role in experience.
Setting for all psychedelics, and I consider cannabis a psychedelic. It's very important. We know that.
Yeah. So so that was one of the challenges I remember with him in creating a contest, a cup, was how do we eliminate all those variables so that it's even? So he'd have people take them home, try them blind, so you don't know which one you're trying, but then make sure you're always in the same environment as best you can every time you try it. So maybe you go in a quiet room and that's your experience. Because if you go out partying with one and stay home with another, you're probably going to think one's like really exciting, the other one's very chill. It's not even. So yeah, I think nostalgia probably does play a big role for a lot of people, which is perfectly fine.
Dave Crockett said, and I'm fans of those guys too, Crockett Family Farms, and they really put in the work, and I appreciate what those guys are doing. And Dave said one time in an interview that he thought if you were going to do a cup, it should be joint. That way, because most people are making up their mind before they even open the jar.
I like that. Yeah, you can't see it.
Yeah. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention that I'm running an absolute ton of stuff from Green Bodie that he was super kind to lace me up with, and really excited about because a lot of his stuff, one of the reasons I'm so attracted to his breeding projects is because you'll get a Chem times a Northern Lights number 5, so you'll get kind of what we consider to be more building block stuff. He's not chasing any of the hype stuff. And but yeah, setting, like the KiS cut of the Super Silver Haze Sour Diesel that I got from Bag Seed at your house from Andrew.
Yeah.
The first time I smoked it, just because I was hanging out with you and Andrew and everybody at KiS, that's probably the highest I ever got off of that strain, just because I was around good people. I was having fun. I still love that cut. I love how it tastes. I love how clear it is. But where I initially kind of was like, oh, this is kind of a giggly strain. I don't know if it's a giggly strain or if I was just having a really great day hanging out with people I like. So I'm fully willing to admit that, and I've experienced it.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, I see some questions popping up already in the chat. And I want to say I recognize a lot of the people in the comment section, which is kind of fun. Like I keep seeing names and stuff. And I see that shout out to Yellow Skunk Farms for joining us. We talked about you last week. Maybe I get you on one of these YouTube lives. That might be a good way to do it. I know we were talking via DMs of a way to connect on something, but yeah, good to see you in here, man. Appreciate what you're doing. If anyone hasn't followed Yellow Skunk Farms on Instagram, you absolutely should, because it is a trip what he is pulling off in his I don't know, basement, garage. I don't know where it is in his indoor little environment there. It looks like a lot of fun. So cool. All right. Well, let's dive into the questions.
The only thing it's missing is a GI Joe diorama. That's the only thing I would add.
No way, man. It's perfect the way it is. It's like you have your own little indoor ecosystem of nature.
I told you I want to I want a creek in my living room more than anything.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. All right, I saw a question, I missed it. Oh, here it is. Okay. Living soil, drybacks, mid to late flower. What are your thoughts on that?
I like drybacks late flower. While I'm still bulking, while I'm still building VOCs, and this is something you and I were just talking about. Like we did a 9-week plant, and I wrote down CO2, temperature, relative humidity, so a target VPD, and how we got there. Everything except for soil moisture, we put down all of the variables, and so like how you should dial that CO2 back the last 3 weeks, how you should be dropping temperature and PAR a little bit so you can preserve VOCs. And I do think that, well, I shouldn't say, I think we know that herbivory and drybacks are beneficial for us as cannabis growers in developing esters, alcohols, terpenes, all the volatiles that we want to keep, so that, we can quantify cannabis in our experience to it. And so I do like to do drybacks late. Mid flower, I would get, if we're talking about an 8-week plant, weeks 1 through 3 are the stretch where things are really firing off. 4, 5, and 6, you're really starting to bulk. And so I like to keep my irrigation, my moisture content fairly high. One of the things, we know that, like, how do plants root interception, mass flow, and diffusion are how plants get their nutrients. And if we don't, mass flow just means it's coming with water. Diffusion's higher to lower concentration. And so the bulk of what's going to our plants, mass diffusion, and especially a lot of the trace, and so if we dry back too soon, then we could be losing access to those important elements that are helping us bulk up and build those things that we want to keep. But late in the round, like weeks 7 and 8, 9, I'll definitely start drying things back, because I do appreciate the trichome expression that we get with the dryback. And as long as you're tapering off your PAR and your temps, reducing that water can be beneficial there.
Yeah, I'm going to take a slightly different angle on this, just to give an alternative perspective. And I'm going to share another perspective from the Galaxy solution shared, because this is a common belief system too. And I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying this is very common. So a lot of people in living soil don't like to do drybacks because it will kill or inhibit microbe or nutrient cycling, which is the main way. Microbes are the main way we're cycling nutrients in an organic system. So you add fertilizer, alfalfa meal, organic alfalfa meal. It's not available to the plant. It has to get broken down by the microbes, cycled, and then put into an ionic form that the plant can then take up as nutrients. So when you do introduce drought stress or drybacks, you could potentially slow that process. So that's what Galaxy Solutions is referring to, and why some people don't do drybacks. Now, to just kind of further the conversation, because I don't know that I have an answer to this. I tend to lean towards Brandon's answer of saying,
well, yeah, I agree. I agree with what Galaxy Solutions is saying. That's why the timing's important. That's why, because the last 2 weeks, if I inhibit uptake in my last 2 weeks, I'm not mad about that. But, in weeks 4, 5, and 6, I'd be concerned about that. So it's all about timing. There's always another level.
Yeah. So what we're doing with a dryback, and actually this is a good comment too. It is a relative term. So it can mean very different things to different people, but essentially what we're talking about is drought stress. We're stressing the plant to a certain extent by removing its access to as much water as it would normally get. What does that do exactly? Well, stress in general, whether that's drought stress or humidity stress or herbivory, like Brandon talked about. All of these things are going to force the plant to increase its secondary metabolite production, which are things that we want in our final, crop, which is increased terpenes, increased cannabinoids, all those esters, alcohols, all of those things. The thing to consider, though, is as we do that, what are we giving up? Because the plant has a choice. It only has so much energy or so much genetic potential. So when we stress it, we may increase those things, but what we're going to be giving up then is biomass production, aka yield. So it's a dance that we have to do. Now, I think Brandon and I both agree we want to limit plant stress during the stages where the plant is stretching or growing the most, weeks, 2 to 4, let's say 2 to 5. I mean, we could argue about when that period is, but later on, as the plant is, quote unquote, finishing, I would argue it's not necessarily senescing, but let's just say finishing, because these plants could live relatively long. So the last couple of weeks before you harvest, that would be a time to consider introducing some of these things like drybacks. And when we do that, keep in mind that this could vary by genetics too. So you might have some genetics that could respond really well to it and others that may not. But I think it's worth a conversation. And I don't know that we can conclusively say for the cannabis plant or the cannabis industry, we have one answer or methodology that is going to fit every situation. Anything you want to add or rebut what I just said?
We could talk about this for hours and hours, So like, where does the dryback effect happen initially? At the surface where we have the most evapotranspiration from the bed, so that top inch is going to dry down fastest. That I don't really worry about because I don't have a whole lot of roots in that top inch and half inch, and again, it really comes back to timing, and you alluded to that as well. Like your bulking phase, you want access to everything, and then the last 2 weeks, plants are really starting to slow down as far as their bulking, and so that's why I choose to do it then. But there's a million ways to skin this cat, and whatever way works for folks is the way to do it.
I mean, if I'm being honest, I probably unintentionally have drybacks introduced throughout my cycle when I screw up my blue mats or, whatever. Something always seems to happen. So I think we have more unintentional plant stress that occurs than we even realize. So keep that in mind too.
And keep in mind that try to think on a micro level. We're a macro organism, and so we tend to think in terms of macro. A lot of times when I'll say things about herbivory, people will push back and be like, well, it's not going to keep a deer or a rabbit from eating my plants. It happens all the time. And that's true. But, a plant can't move. So how does it defend itself? And so it does chemical warfare. And so that's what a lot of these VOCs that we treasure are for, because a big healthy dose of limonene might be just the deterrent that would keep an aphid or a thrips from wanting your plant versus another one. Obviously in monoculture situations like we've got indoors, pests are going to eat what's on the menu, and so they'll eat whatever that you've got. And so it's not a perfect defense, but it's all the plants can do. They can't get up and move. They can't swat stuff, and so try to think on a micro level, because things that might not put you off may very well put off a pest or a pathogen, these chemical signals.
And there's other forms of stress too. And one of the things that we see is salt stress from chlorides and sodium. So different types of stress will induce different types of plant responses. So it's a complicated topic. And as you stress your plant, again, this will potentially reduce yields. It also opens you up to pests and pathogens. The plant's going to be more susceptible and less likely or able to fight these things off. And I just finished an amazing interview earlier today with Dr. Nicole Gauthier talking about pathogens. She's a pathologist out of Kentucky University, and So we were talking basically about how a lot of these pathogens, not all of them, but a lot of them, like botrytis and powdery mildew, are everywhere. And so if we stress the plant too much, or we create an environment for those pathogens, they're gonna take off. So we have to keep that in mind too. Yeah. So as long as you're thinking about all those things, then I think you can start experimenting with it and find out what works best in your environment.
Yep.
I see Chad in here, Chad Westport. Looking forward to catching up with him and hearing how the move went. We missed this month's YouTube live, but I'm excited to catch up with him next month and hear the latest on his new grow setup and the new farmhouse and everything. So that'll be fun.
Yeah, I know you were on the Mr. Organics YouTube channel not too long ago, and I just got interviewed on there, and they're big fans of Chad over there as well. So just giving those guys a shout out. Yeah,
who's not a fan of Chad? Chad's the best.
Right.
All right. Well, let's move on here. I think he just was in Vegas too, from snooping on his Instagram channel there. All right. Let's see here. So next question was from Dabber Dan. Is dehydrated bee pollen a good thing to give your plants? Secondly, if it is good, how can it be applied to the plants? Or what are the benefits if good? I mean, I'll go first by saying I know it's very expensive. I've heard some people use it. I could not speak to this whatsoever as to benefits. I would assume we could get any benefits that we got from it from other cheaper things. But yeah, that's really all I can say on that. I don't have a lot of experience with it.
I don't either. I really don't know anything on the topic. You know, there might be some sort of signal in there that would create a acquired immune response or something from the plant that would be beneficial, but I have no idea. I'm gonna have to do some studying.
Yeah, maybe I can. If we run out of questions or comments to share, I'll share some of my interview with Dr. Gauthier, because I learned some stuff. It was really good, specifically about mycotoxins. So, all right. It's what 420 asks. When I make a super soil and I'm adding, I think this is dolomite lime, and oyster shell and basalt and biochar and down to earth amendments that have dolomite in there, and I test my soil pH and it's 8. So I don't know if it's a question, but I think I think what you're saying is you're too high. Your pH is too high based on what you're adding.
Dolomite is is the fastest acting liming product. I am not a fan of it. It tightens soil outdoors, and it brings in excessive magnesium to calcium. So it inverts your calcium to magnesium ratio, which causes uptake issues, and it can be hard to fix that without really raising your osmotic pressure to chase that. So it really depends. There's maybe 2 to 4% of the United States that could use dolomite outside productively. Inside, I never ever recommend it. But if you're, the actionable response here would be to reduce the amount of dolomite you're adding. But if you are using dolomite, you would want to get a soil report just to make sure of where you're landing with respect to calcium and magnesium.
Yeah, let me back up a little bit. So dolomite lime, and just for people who want to look it up if you're not familiar, it's DOLOMITE. It's calcium magnesium carbonate. And maybe we should just talk about what the different limes are. So there's dolomite lime. There's hydrated lime. Don't use hydrated lime. It's caustic. So just cross that one out altogether. There's agricultural lime, which is calcium carbonate, and oyster shell flour, mined oyster shell deposits, also just calcium carbonate. There's really no difference between agricultural lime and oyster shell. They're both 99% calcium carbonate. So you're picking up a little more impurities. You might get a tiny amount of trace minerals. It's not anything noticeable there. So source whichever one is cheaper, or whichever one is a finer particulate, because particulate size plays a big role in amendment or lime availability. Other limes are gypsum, I guess, calcium sulfate. I don't know if it's classified as a lime liming agent
lime
because it's a sulfate, but that's the other main calcium source. That's why I'm throwing it in there.
Yeah. Well, astenite will move your pH, and then, everything's going to move your pH. If you add calcium, potassium, nitrogen, urea, there's all these different things. But as far as actionable, what's really going to show up, it's dolomite, ag lime, which is calcitic, lime, and then wollastonite, and then if you have to go down, sulfur. Those are the ones that typically get recommended in agriculture.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you've already mixed this, so you're already high. You could cut it with more base mix, which would be like your peat, your compost, your pumice, to lower your pH. If I were to do this in the future, if you were mixing from scratch, I would say just use either oyster shell and egg lime, gypsum. If you want to put a tiny amount of basalt in there, you could, but you could also leave it out. You're not going to get any reasonable results in a time frame that makes sense for cannabis from that basalt. And then the down to earth amendments it's just a brand of organic amendments. Like that'd be like us calling all our fish meal like KiS Organics fish meal, or whatever. They're the same thing. So really, there are amendments we like better than others. If you go on our blog page, I list out sort of what they all do. There's a YouTube video I made where I kind of just talk through a bunch of amendments. But of this list, I think from a calcium perspective, I'd want to get my calcium from maybe a little bit of egg lime if you need to raise pH. The majority of it from gypsum. You can get some wollastonite in there, which is calcium silicate, to get some of the benefits of silica. Because the other thing in there with the biochar, most biochars are alkaline, so that's probably also raising your pH. So 8 is definitely up there. I would like you to at least get down to like 7.2, 7.3 range for cannabis.
And you could easily also come in like assuming everything else is correct in this bed. If pH was the only thing, you could add sulfur. Now that is going to add to osmotic stress, but a couple cups per yard of sulfur, and again, like Tad mentioned, particle size is everything. So if you add prilled sulfur, which makes sense outside because you can't put dust into a spreader on the back of a tractor. It's just going to blow it all over your neighbor's yard. But for, indoor, we would prefer to use, the finest grade that we can. And 2 cups per yard would be a great place to start moving that back down.
Yeah. And I think just to answer this question in here real quick too, I think garden lime is probably agricultural lime. It's probably the same thing. If you look on the back and the ingredients list magnesium, then it's probably dolomite. If it lists just like 99% calcium carbonate, then it's probably garden lime. So I think that's probably what it is. Yeah. Okay, cool. Let me see here. Sorry, I'm jumping around here. The problem is the comment section is a little behind our conversation. So when you guys comment on something, it's probably like 30 seconds to a minute after we've talked about it. So I kind of have to like work backwards, and we need a producer, man. So I don't have to go back and forth.
I'm too easily distracted. I don't look at the chat the whole time because I get busy laughing about something or.
I know the comments are always a lot of fun. This is going back to a comment from when we were talking about genetics. Said the last in Thunderfuck was perfect for knocking you out at the end of a long day from Christopher. Yeah. So
fingers crossed.
Throw that up there. Ramlijo says original haze looks horrible versus today, but holds up very experience wise. That's sort of what you were saying. You had the same thing. You like the feel of it, and the plant may look like crap. I noticed from watching Yellow Skunk Farm's videos that he likes to grow those really like sativa plants with the
long flowering,
thinner leaves, taller, more internode spacing, longer flowering period. Yeah, the ugly plants, as people call them.
I threw a party one time and I had all kinds of strains, and nobody touched the haze until like the one guy I knew that grew showed up and was like, "Nobody touched the haze." and it was just it looked like hay. Everything else was nice and nuggy and triked out, and you know, people were loving it, but they missed out on the real herb in the room.
All right, sorry, I'm going through the comments again when you're talking. I just want to say thank you, Jamie. I really appreciate this. I do feel like we've been at this now for a little over a year. We usually get anywhere from 75 to 120 people tuning in. When Chad joins us, more people tune in because Chad's great.
Cool.
But I will say I see a lot of the same people in here. And honestly, like at this point, it's just been something that like for Brandon and I, it's a nice little break in the day to get to like answer questions, connect with growers without having to be on long meetings and conversations. And so this is kind of just a fun period to just chill out and answer questions. So we enjoy the community on here a lot too.
Yeah, but we get as much out of this as you guys do. And I look at it as a way, I know Tad does too, like home growers can't afford to get on a call with me and Tad and Dr. Ben sometimes. And so this is a way of kind of tithing back to our community. We really do care about growers, and this is a really nice vehicle for me. I'll speak for myself to be able to give back to growers, and you know, in my favorite deadhead way, there's no money involved. There's no, you know, it's just, we're just sharing. So I love that.
Yeah. I'm posting this comment from Kevin. So he says garden lime is down to earth brand ag lime that's prilled. So prilled is just a way of taking the lime and making it into like a little tiny pellet that will break down when it gets wet. It has a binding agent typically, as I understand it. So yeah, that would be a perfectly good option to use then.
Slower. It's going to be slower than fine grade, like the powdered.
Yeah. All right, Brandon, you're going to have to answer this one. I don't know. I don't use EM1. What's a good way to store it for little nugs, and should he activate it before storing it?
I don't think that you need to activate it before storing it. The only way I know, and there may be other ways, the only way I know to store EM1 long term would be to ferment it. And I would probably use brown sugar, you know, it's cheaper than honey. You could, but yeah, I would ferment it if I was gonna store it for a long period of time. For me, the active ingredient in EM1 is just lactobacillus. That's my understanding, and so
it's a consortium of lactobacillus species. I can't remember how many, but I do know that it's from Dr. Higa, I believe, back in the day, or Dr. Cho.
Fake lab, Dr. Cho.
Yeah, it was out of Japan, I think, originally. Or out of Asia for sure. But yeah, I wouldn't activate anything before storing it. But afterwards, when you get it back out, you could probably give it a food source to get it going. Again, I mean, just from my understanding of microbes. But again, I don't use EM1, so I can't really give a lot of advice on that one. All right. Does plant food enhance terps like bone meal or fish meal or things? Brandon?
Well, so certain things, and like fish hydrolysates on this list, certain things, if you add them late in the round, can definitely diminish terpenes. I remember back, you know, even 10 years ago, there were guys who were like, you know, I think this has mostly gone away. I hope it's gone away, but folks saying, oh, you should add molasses to your beds. Your buds will sweeten up, you know, and that's
Kool-Aid. I remember that.
Yeah. And so, no, it's not going to, you know, you can restrict fertility. You can, that will help preserve VOCs and that sort of thing. You can add different inputs that form biological relationships with the plant that will enhance terpenes. But, you know, bone meal, you know, like we talk about, like things taste fishy when we eat them, you know, and so like somebody might complain that waterfowl tastes fishier than land fowl, or you know, things like that. But you know, your final flour is not going to taste fishy from using fish meal. It might have decreased terpenes from too much nitrogen at the end of the round, or it might, have better terpenes because it got fish meal early on and was able to have all the building blocks it needed, but it's not going to make your pot taste like the input, if that's the question.
Yeah, I mean, no, I know there's certain terpenes that are tied to certain nutrients or minerals, like Chad here mentioning sulfur specifically for that like gas expression. But really, I think the key to fertility or any of these amendments is one, it's complex. So it's going to be a combination of water, microbial activity, temperature, humidity, genetics, pruning. All of these things are going to impact the plant. But then also just, I think, aiming for proper fertility is really what you want to get there. So it's not so much about whether I choose to use bone meal or fish bone meal, though they're going to have different heavy metal levels, slightly different mineral levels. The real thing is like, am I using them at a proper ratio to give the plant sufficient phosphorus? Am I accounting for the nitrogen it's bringing in? So I'm not over applying nitrogen. Like all of these things are just sort of need to be in balance in order to really optimize your plant health.
And like, just because the terpenator is a great example, because color and flavor come from sulfur compounds. And so we know that we need adequate sulfur. Terpenator was probably more attractive to salt growers than organic growers because we tend to lean on sulfates and have plenty of sulfur in our soil anyway. And, like I used to go to this hydro store in South Carolina, allegedly, and they would try to give me stuff to trial. Hey, run this. Tell me what you think of it. They knew I'd been growing for a minute, and so they wanted to see what I thought of it. And terpenator, I was like, didn't do anything. And he's like, crazy. I heard from this one guy that it, and I'm like, in my head, I'm thinking, well, that guy just didn't have enough sulfur, And so if you have a limiting factor and you add it, it will go better. Hey, Louie, good to see you, bro. Thanks for being here.
Yeah. And so one thing you made me think of some products out there that are like pumpkin ferments or peach ferments. Those are not going to make your plants taste like pumpkins or peaches or anything like that. So just keep that in mind with those products. With any product, when it comes to
those are spray packs.
Yeah, when it comes to like anything, terpenes, cannabinoids, all that stuff. What I think about really is like, if let's say I took a peach ferment and apply it to my plants and all of a sudden I get this terpene expression that's incredible. I'd want to go back and think about like, what was the limiting factor in my growth that caused this product to give me this expression? And then work backwards from there. Because if I can figure out the physiology, the science behind what created that effect, I don't have to spend my money on a bunch of products and I'll better understand it. Yeah. I'll better, because a lot of times, dude, I can't tell you how many times people like back in the day would go to a trade show or convention and come back with like 50 different samples and they put it all together in a grow and maybe it's the best grow they've ever done. Well, what was good, what was bad, you don't remember, or you can't even know, or vice versa. Like the grow totally fails. You don't know what caused it. So if you do want to experiment with any of the products, I see people talking about in the chat or just, we've talked about here, just do one product. And then, if you think like, I see Dabber Dan just mentioned blackstrap molasses. Let's just say you think that terpenator is giving you this response, and maybe you can get the same from molasses. Maybe the next run, just try a little bit of blackstrap molasses and see if that gives you the same response to where you don't have to buy the terpenator because you can get blackstrap anywhere. So there's
and what that's doing is that's a sugar food source for microbes, and so you increase your microbial production. And so that in turn increases your nitrogen, phosphorus, whatever those microbes are working on. And so it's not sweetening the plant; it's giving, indirectly
carbohydrates,
the food. So it's yeah, but as far as the, it's not like this, like Kool-Aid. It's not going to just, it doesn't just flow through the xylem and come out in the buds.
Let's not give any of these companies like Advanced Nutrients and General Hydro and Botanicare any more credit than they deserve for creating these special products. At the end of the day, we're all using the same stuff. I mean, more or less, unless we're talking about people that are straight up lying or cheating on their label. For the most part, we're all using the same thing. So it's more about price and education, I think, more than anything. At least on the organic side. I'm not going to speak to the salt folks. All right. All right, Brandon, here's one from Little Nugs. Part of my bed is growing like a weed. The other part, not so good. 60 millibars across the bed. So that's a measure of the water that would say that beds are on the wetter end, but not terrible, not out of a reasonable range, but on the moister end of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the beds on the wet side of things, I really like 80 to 120 is where I usually land. So it's a little wet for me. I have to assume that if it's one bed, that light, temperature, airflow, everything else is the
genetics.
Same. And so genetics is the one thing. And so it could be one genetic is just way more productive than another. You just have different morphology. Or if it's clones of the same one, you could, I've got an undisclosed number of plants, and I have one tray of cuts that I took all at the same time, and they're just dragging behind for whatever reason, and so when you take a large number, you can have some duds that just, that's why with that call we did this morning, Tad, like we recommended that they, at least for a while, shoot at least 10% above their total plant target so that they can account for, some that dud. You're dealing with that a little bit in your room right now, where you had certain cultivars that definitely took off and were more vigorous.
Oh yeah.
That could be morphology, but it could also just be that grapefruit is just, old as dirt, and it's just acquired a bacterial and viral load. So there's a lot of things that could create this issue.
Yeah, I just posted this on Patreon, I think yesterday. So I share my grow on there. I'll show you guys what I'm dealing with here. Let's see. Here we go. So I think you can see my screen now. Let me remove this comment because it doesn't really apply to the photo. Yeah, so you can see here, this canopy is shit. It's not even at all. It's because I have 12 plants, but they're all different cultivars. And so getting an even canopy was practically impossible given the growth habit, because some of them, you can't really see it here. I'm talking about stuff here too, which is not helping this video. Oh, and then I have some seeds going. Let me see here. So if I pause it here, right back here where my arrow is, there is a grapefruit plant that you can't really see because this guy is just taking over the whole bed. So the ones on the outside that I planted were the ones that my buddy told me would be more vigorous growing. And frankly, they are. So these three plants are taking over these three on the inside, and the same problem in the other beds. So, yeah, it's been a challenge for me, and that's just how genetics, just the variability in genetics in terms of how their growth habit, but then also how they like the fertility in the room. Sometimes you'll get something that just does not like the fertility that you've given, the 95% of cannabis genetics are going to like. And then in that case, you have to make a decision. Am I going to create metrics just for that one plant, or am I going to toss it and stick with ones that are going to grow the way I grow? And that's a conversation you have to have depending on your goals.
And if you don't, this is another argument for, turning your soil. If you apply your fertility and it's not even, you could have like hot spots and dead zones, in your bed. So it's important to make sure that you get your fertility out very evenly across that bed.
All right, let's see. More questions. Should I stop using root-wise microbes at the end of flower? Or should I stop a couple weeks before harvest? So root-wise is a consortium of microbes. I don't think there's any risk to using. I'm assuming that you're doing it as a soil drench and not a foliar, because we don't want to be foliaring anything after a few weeks into flower once pistil formation is occurring. I don't have any issue with you using it up to harvest. Are you going to get a lot of benefit off those last couple of weeks of flower? Probably not. I mean, stopping a couple of weeks before harvest, I think would be probably a good idea anyway, because you're not going to get a lot of benefit out of it the last couple of weeks. Yeah, but I don't. Yeah. I would say if you're using a microbial product like Rootwise or any of these, using them through flower is a good practice. Nothing to add. Okay. Sometimes I pause just to see if you're going to throw in any nugget of information, and then you don't, and it freaks me out because you being quiet. You being quiet weirds me out. I don't know what to do with that.
Yeah. My family does.
All right. Here's another one. I was thinking of lining my pots with perlite, then read something about perched water table effect. Yes. So would you recommend staying away from this practice, maybe using clay pebble instead? Well, this is an interesting question because it brings up this sort of the principles of this, which is that any dissimilar media stacked on top of each other will cause water to stop there. So let's say, and it doesn't matter what order they're in. You could have sand on top and soil down below in the case of like a golf course. When they aerate and they add sand, that would create a perched water table. Or you could have soil and then gravel, or soil and then rocks. What's going to happen is as that water goes down through that first layer, let's call this first layer, in this case, the soil. When it reaches these clay pebbles or the perlite, it's going to stop there because it's dissimilar. And when it hits that point, the water is going to accumulate at that level until the gravity is able to overcome the capillary action on the water. So the gravitational pull of the water has to overcome that. So it's going to kind of pause there until it reaches a certain level. And then the water will hold at that level and then start to leach out down through the bottom. How do we use this to our advantage? Well, the way I think of it is if I had a giant tall pot, say, 2 feet tall, and I'm growing annual flowers in it on my porch, I don't want to fill that whole thing with soil. That's expensive. I could put something up until the last 4 to 6 inches and then put soil there. And that would allow me to take advantage of this perched water table effect. If the issue is trying to increase drainage, then you're better off mixing that into the soil itself to create a homogeneous mix. But if you say just are trying to raise the level of where the water is going to be in your soil, then that's how you kind of utilize it. This sort of effect in your container.
Yeah, if you want to add weight to a container, you could add rocks to the bottom. But as Tad explained, all it does is makes your actual pot smaller that you're growing in, and so it doesn't help with the drainage. And that's something that, my mom's a retired botanist, and that's something that, my brother and I used to do helping her. We would put rocks in the bottom of pots and pass them over. But that, because intuitively it makes sense. But that's just thinking about gravity, because we've been filling up glasses from the bottom to the top since we were little kids. So that's how we think it works. But really it's from the top to the bottom, because you've got to, that capillary action. Water being a polar molecule, it's got such a strong affinity for anything in that pot.
That's why SIPs and earth boxes work at all, is because of this effect.
Wicking.
All right, Brandon, I'm going to have you answer this question. I'm going to run out. I will be right back in like 2 minutes. Can you tackle this one real quick?
Yeah, I'll try to make it a long answer. All right. I am Louisiana. Thanks for being here, man. My soil mix for my first run, doing a 27-gallon HDX tote, doing coot mix. If I do 1/3 15% worm casting and the rest is my bag soil, enough to get me through a run, or do I need to add to it? So the first thing I would say about this is I'm not the world. I've made plenty of soils before joining KiS and since joining KiS, and I've done some Coots mix or the Cornell mix, which is the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So you've got 1/3 aggregate, 1/3 cocoa peat, and 1/3 compost. For me, that ends up being a heavy, mucky mix, and I, for whatever reason, whether it's an island in South Carolina or island in the Pacific Northwest, I tend to live in really wet, swampy places, and I've been growing for a really long time, and so I like to be able to tinker. I like to be able to add things pretty regularly, and so having a mix that drains better allows me to do that. I think that 10 to 15% of worm castings would be plenty. We're usually shooting for something close to what, like 45% cocoa peat, 30% aeration, 15% compost, something around 5% biochar, something like that.
Yeah, peat on cocoa ideally, and 15% is plenty for worm castings. You could go as low as 10 and still be fine.
When you say the rest is bag soil, I would want to know what soil it is, because most of the commercial mixes that are out there, and I've used most of them over the years, don't have sufficient fertility to get you through the end of the run. So I'd want to know what soil that was. And, I would also want to know how long you plan to veg in it, how long you plan to flower in it. But I would be prepared to add fertility just based on, my assumption that whatever bag soil you're using is probably not going to get you there. But it could, chime in the chat, and we'll try to refine the answer.
Yeah, if the soil contains perlite or pumice, some form of aeration already, then you probably don't want to add a third pumice. That might be too much aeration. And then also, if you do it in a 27-gallon tote, just keep in mind that you may want to put some holes in the tote, definitely at the bottom, maybe on the sides, and then don't put a lid on it when it's cooking, because you want it to breathe.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Kevin says, after a run, I always have air in my blue mat sensors, making me wonder if they're becoming less effective or precise. Yes, they are, Kevin. So as you need to fill them all the way to the top. As the water disappears in there, you may need to top it off, because what'll happen is, from my understanding, it just makes it less reactive. So it'll take longer to kick back in when there's that air gap. And so I experienced that in one of my beds, where for some reason the sensor in that bed had completely run out of water, and so it just wasn't turning on the way it needed to be. So I refilled it. I don't know if that's necessarily a faulty sensor. That's something I'd have to reach out directly to Blue Mats on. I don't have an answer there, but I do know that air gap, if there is air in there, and if there are air that happens over the grow cycle, that will impact how quickly it reacts to the moisture in the soil.
Yeah, like think about your brake lines. If you get air in there, your brakes get spongy. They don't react as quickly. So we want that tension.
Thanks, Justin McGill, for the car analogy. All right, Ramleo says,
that's probably the only one I'll ever do.
Yeah, he's talking about the haze in the jar being unrecognizable. Yeah, and he put pictures in the Discord. We do have a private Discord for Patreon members. if anyone wants to check that out. I just wanted to mention that is on there. And I know a lot of the people I see on this are already part of the Patreon, so I appreciate that. And
can I just say real quickly, like, we are offering some free seeds for folks that actually attend the live hangout this Thursday. And I talk to folks all the time, and I'm like, oh, you should just join our Discord or our Patreon. And they're like, oh, I'm a member. And I'm like, well, I never see you there. And they're like, I'm really nervous. I'm afraid to show off my grow. I'm afraid to ask questions. I'm afraid. I guarantee there's somebody else there who would love for you to ask your question. And it's a really nice judgment-free zone. Like, nobody's going to hate on you for your plants, your ideas about growing, so, feel free to hang out. Feel free to show off your stuff. And it's a lot of fun.
Brandon wants more people to join our hangouts is what it comes down to.
I just think they'll get value out of it. They're paying for it. Get the value.
Yeah, I kind of like the hangouts now because they are smaller and fun. All right, where do you get Washington Patient gets clones? I don't know, man. I've been getting clones through connections like facilities and things like that. Friends of mine, I've gotten clones through this guy here on the screen. So, yeah, I don't have an answer for that, but I know there are resources. I just assume, and even when I get them from my buddies, I've gotten from 2 different friends. They came in with pests. Actually, every clone I've gotten from everyone I've gotten clones from has had something, unfortunately. So plan on that. Even Brandon gave me thrips.
But Brandon doesn't have anything.
Yeah. He's been. I know what you've been doing, so I feel pretty good. I would take clones from you again, man.
Yeah. I've been nuking it.
All right, soil testing. We're jumping around today. How do you decide when is a good time to do a mid-cycle? And he says paste test. So we should probably talk about the differences and what you really should be measuring here. So a little context, there's 2 types of soil tests that we typically deal with, at least for our company, because we work specifically with Logan Labs for the most part. And the 2 tests are a Malic 3 test or a standard soil test, which is an acid extraction where they basically tell you everything that's in the soil that comes out with this acid. It's a very strong reaction. And then the other option is a paste test where they essentially take your irrigation water or distilled water and they run it through the soil sample, and then what leaches out is sort of what's available to the plant right now. So you have 2 things. You have what all might be in the soil through strong acid extraction, and then what's available now. And between those 2 pieces of information, we can get a pretty good idea of what to do with your plant or how to treat your soil for fertility. Now, mid-cycle, what I would say is, about 2 weeks out from finishing your grow, if you want to take your soil test from the same period of time in the cycle every single grow. So if you're about 2 weeks out, that gives you enough time to send in a sample, get the results back in those 2 weeks, along with the recommendation, and then you can be ready to go on the day of harvest to add back in the calcium, the magnesium, nitrogen, all those things based on the recommendation for your next cycle. So there's no downtime. You don't want to take your test the last day of flower when you go to harvest, because now you got to wait for the test results, and that's time you could be growing plants. So that's why we say 2 weeks out. So I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to with mid-cycle, or Brandon, I know you have thoughts, so why don't you jump in?
Yeah, so I'm thinking for a mid-cycle test, it's really important, and Bryant Mason talks about this. You want to take a mid-cycle. First of all, I would say don't, unless there's something wrong with your plants, just to save the money. 2, I would say if you're going to do it, timing is really important. So week 3, week 4, if you did that, there would still be some time for corrective action. Tad and I spent a good bit of time with a grower, maybe the last 3 weeks, who has plants that have a week to go, a couple plants that have 2 weeks to go, and they're crashing for a variety of different reasons. They've got, high chlorides, high sodium, and just insufficient fertility. If he had reached out to us in week 3, week 4, we could have said, do this, this, and this. But he's reaching out at week 7 and week 8 on 8-week plants. Really, you just have to kind of let that ride out, because if you start adding fertility at the end of the round, you are going to negatively impact your harvest, your terpenes, all different sorts of things. You could extend your senescence accidentally. And so think of it in terms of crop steering. We don't want to send a message to the plant that it's not time to finish. We want to send all the messages that say, get it in gear. We want you to wrap things up. And so, if you're going to do a mid-cycle test, I would do that only if I had an issue.
Well,
and then I would do that earlier in the round. Otherwise, I feel like you're spending money you don't need to.
I would say mid-cycle, you're better off doing a tissue test. And then depending on what is showing on that test, adding that specific nutrient in an available form to get immediate results. So let's say it was, you get your test back and you're low in phosphorus and it aligns with what plant symptoms you're seeing. Then, based off a tissue test, then you could say, all right, I'm going to apply fish hydrolysate because it contains phosphoric acid, and that would be a great way of addressing it. So
I do think a tissue is more useful mid-round.
Yeah.
100%.
Cool. All right, let's see here. What else? All right, we had a couple more questions. I just wanted to share this back with you, Brandon, in case you didn't see the chat. I said, you mentioned running an Airstone Earth box. He says, I tried it. He corrected that. He said, I tried it and it worked phenomenal. No curling, signs of overwatering. So I'm glad that was
awesome.
It's nice when, it's always good when things work out. I've been adding high quality coconut water to my watering schedule. Is a 12-ounce bottle too much? I can talk about why someone may want to use coconut water. Brandon, do you have anything you want to say on this, or do you want me to take this one?
Well, my first reaction is, why are you adding the coconut water? Because I see a lot of folks that add surfactants on a regular basis, which is a wetter spreader, something to break the surface tension of water so that it penetrates the beds more efficiently. But if you've got soil that's already been hydrated, that's not really necessary. I do know that some folks use coconut water for enzymatic properties. I think when it comes to anything enzymatic, a little goes a long way. Enzymes by definition are not typically they don't exist as permanent compounds, and so they can be recycled, and so a little bit goes a long way. And then I would just pass it over to you, Tad.
Yeah, so this whole idea of coconut water came from Clackamas Coot, Jim back in the day. His theory is that seeds contain the highest level of enzymatic activity. Everything a seed needs exists inside that seed. So that's why when we're growing seeds, we always start them with very low fertility, high aeration soil mixes. That's what a seed starter is. You don't want to start a seed in like really fertile soil. It's just not optimal. So knowing that in theory, the seed has everything it needs inside of it, and high enzyme activity and things like that. That's where this idea of sprouted seed tea came in from Coot. And then also coconut being the largest seed, and that water inside being so nutritious. The idea was if you water with it, it'll make your other seeds and plants grow faster, better, healthier. We sell coconut water powder on our website as a concentrate for people who do this. It's not something that we like when people say like, hey, what's the KiS method look like? Or what's our program look like? We're never like, hey, you got to do coconut water. But just like anything with this plant or malted barley, there are a lot of people that claim they get really good results using this thing. And I understand the logic behind it, but I haven't seen any trials to show that it has, the impacts that who say it does. So that sort of thing. As far as 12 ounces being too much, I mean, I don't know how many plants you're watering, so I don't even know what your dilution rate is. So I have no idea if that's too much. It might be too much for one plant, not enough for 5,000. So yeah.
I don't personally do it. I wouldn't have any problems with anybody doing it. It's not going to do anything bad. I don't think it's necessary. I'll just leave it at that. I don't think it's necessary.
Right on.
You know, like sprouted seed teas, like you already said it, seeds already have everything they need. And if I had like really old seeds that were valuable, like these ATF 77s, if they weren't popping like they are, germinating. But if they weren't, I would, even as an organic person, if I have really valuable or really rare seeds, I'm going to go for gibberellic acid or, something like that. That's, kind of tried and true in a lab that I know is going to have a beneficial impact. So,
yeah, I want to go back for a minute because I feel like I kind of threw you under the bus for a second, and I just I felt bad in retrospect. So 3 cycles ago, when I started up my grow, I got some plants from Brandon, some starts, and he called me like a few days after I had the plants. He's like, I found a thrips in my room. I think I gave you thrips. It's like giving you an STD. He was panicking. This was a year and a half ago now, I would say. It was when I built this new room.
That's probably 2 years
ago now. It was a long time ago. Anyway, long story short, the thrips were easily dealt with. It wasn't a big deal. Brandon then successively ended up with root aphids. We've talked about this whole story, but I feel very confident like I would get plants from you in the future. I don't like things happen and thrips are everywhere. They can show up and they actually can pupate inside the leaf tissue itself. So your plants can look clean when they arrive. And then a week later you could be like, oh, I have thrips, so I certainly don't blame you. And I didn't want people to think like if they ever got genetics from you, they're getting bugs. So I just wanted to clarify that statement. So.
And you know me, I'm the first person to own it.
Yeah.
If I screw up with plants, I love to show it off. And I think that you have a moral obligation. It is like an STD. And if you get an STD, you've got to call everybody you've been with. And so, if I'm going to, I've had people begging me for cuts for months and months right now because I've got some absolute just banger cup winners that, when they smoke the flower, they're like, you want my first kid? What do you want? I'll give you anything. Like I had one guy who was like, I will walk from Oklahoma to Washington and take that cut with root aphids, and so you have to own it. I think one, that speaks to your credibility, but 2, you have a moral responsibility to say, hey man, I just screwed up. And,
and sometimes I would say it's not even a screw up. Now, root aphids, hop latent, like those things you can absolutely avoid, but like spider mites, thrips, even some of these pathogens.
The folks that I got the root aphids from are still selling clones. They haven't slowed down, and they just kept on keeping on. And I told them, hey, I'm not mad. It's my fault. That's the other thing. It's like, I don't feel like I can get mad if you give me bugs, because the only way that got into my room is I broke my personal protocols. That's my fault. So I do think that as the person who got them, I have to take responsibility. And as the person who could send them out, you have to take responsibility. And so I've gone through, I've missed 3 rounds in order to tackle this situation. And so I'm going above and beyond. And, I'm not letting anything out until I'm 100% sure.
Yeah. I mean,
and I think
you've put these plants through hell to try and get them clean again. I know with all, and the applications and all the products, like it's pretty wild. I haven't seen anyone tackle it as, proactively as you or aggressively. Yeah. So I do appreciate that, but I think you bring up a good point. Like as a grower, we have to assume any plants that we get or any genetics, even seeds, could contain disease, whether pest or pathogen, and we need to treat them as such. So, yeah, I just think that's important to touch on. All right, we're already over time. Lil Nugs had to run already. I have 4 more highlighted questions, comments. Let's just do these real fast. So, Dabber Dan, I saw you guys were talking about biochar. Yes, 4 to 8% is a great range. That's good advice. Yeah, so people, you can always get the biochar raw. Like, for example, we have them by the cubic foot on our website. Cubic foot goes a long way for a home grower. It doesn't go bad in the soil. It lasts forever. If you're mixing soils initially, you can just add the raw biochar. You don't need to charge it per se. If you already have plants in the soil, then I would just wait till the next cycle and mix it in when you mix in your fertilizer. Otherwise, it needs a little bit of nitrogen. You reach out if you have questions about that. All right, Ross says, because getting back to we're talking about sodium and chloride, he says you can mix it with some water-soluble gypsum as a way of helping to deal with that. I would just say, Ross, I think this is a good option when you're dealing with, when you're flushing the soil to remove the high sodium and chloride. I don't know if watering with gypsum in a bed or in a container that is super high osmotic pressure, like your EC is already too high because of the sodium and chloride. If you're not flushing those things out, I don't know that it'll totally fix it, but gypsum does help with high saline conditions due to the calcium that it brings in.
Yeah, calcium sulfate's not going to do anything to tie up sodium or chlorides. Those have to be flushed. The only things that work really well for that, as far as your water, would be deionization and RO. And then the main issue with high chlorides, the way that those present is different from high sodium. High sodium is going to block actively other productive cations, calcium, magnesium, and especially potassium, which is intimately tied to your harvest metric. But what we also see with high chlorides is plants that look pretty damn good, but the harvest metric falls through the floor. So I would. Yeah.
All right. I had to add a question because it was our boy Chad. All right. This one real fast. John Beam, question about carbon dioxide and pests. I notice soil mites swarming out. Okay. Anything swarming is probably a beneficial. It's probably springtails would be my guess. I don't believe supplemental carbon dioxide is an issue for any growers from a pest perspective. Now, Suzanne might come on here and share some relatively obscure research about how high CO2 causes this life cycle change or process in certain insects. So there may be something there. But as a general rule in terms of what applies to most growers, the supplemental CO2 is more of an issue in the fact that your soil beds are alive. They're also producing CO2, especially at night, in addition to what you're getting from your plants off-gassing at night. So between those two, you can end up with excessive or too high of CO2 during night cycle, and that should be reduced. But during the day, provided we're talking around 1,000 ppm, 1,200 even, like not crazy high numbers, I don't think any supplemental CO2 is an issue. And
I start getting headaches around 3,200. I start getting headaches. Some people are more sensitive than others, but that's still safe, so you can have fairly high levels and it'd still be safe for a human mammal. But
yeah, I don't know of it being an issue from a pest perspective. And I think other people also comment you could have, they could just be beneficial insects. And I'm amazed at how much CO2 my living soil beds produce, even during the day. Like I'm able to maintain above ambient in a lot of cases just from my soil beds. So that is the case for maybe a larger volume of soil for that reason.
Yeah. And you want, those high levels at night give you night growth, which is just fresh flushes of pistils on otherwise finished. And what that ties into is you're delaying senescence.
Okay. So what Mr. Leal is referring to is I did an interview with Joey Santori, the crime pays, but botany doesn't guy. I shared it so every time I do an interview, the day I do it, I try to give it to the Patreon group. raw, and then sometimes I don't release an episode for a month or so after I recorded it. The Joey one was a little controversial because he has for anyone that follows Joey, he's phenomenal. He's like an old rail worker, and he talks like it. Like his language is a little bit rough in that regard. I am gonna probably publish it on the pod.
He's a Chicago sailor. He sounds like
he's a really awesome, intelligent dude. There's less actionable information, which is something I try to think about with my podcast. Like, how can I, how does this really help a grower be a better grower? His is more ranting about all the things wrong in the world, which he's absolutely right about. But it is on my list of podcasts to release, but I got that Dr. Punja one, and it was just so good I couldn't hold on to it. And now the one I did today that I still need to download, I want to release that one sooner too, but I will absolutely release it. So I just wanted to share that.
Joey's is going to get flagged for excess fuck usage, like.
Yeah, he's the first one to say the C word on the Cannabis Cultivation and Science podcast. So he'll always have that trophy. All right, let's end with this one then. For Chad out here, we're talking about thrips. What's your approach to battling thrips? You can go first.
Yeah, well, I've actually just listened to the that Cornell thing that you sent me this morning. I'm not that far into it, but I'm at least past the thrips, and I've had thrips before, and I think that once you have something, you get pretty good. Once bit, twice shy kind of thing. You get good at reacting and having the tools on hand. So. Spinosad is the best single thing you could do for foliars. Thrips, it's really important to have the proper ID so you know where they pupate. If they pupate in the soil, Bovaria, SF nematodes in the soil would be very effective. Bovaria won't kill nematodes, and so the nematodes get coated in the Bovaria and move it around in your soil. So those are really important to do together. You can do that. And then as far as foliars, I like to tank mix Bovaria with an oil. Spinosad works way better for thrips than Epishield or Sufoil or Monterey or any of that stuff by itself. So that's like hands down. And that's well documented across all areas of cultivation, not just cannabis. But if you're going to spray something, I like to add some Bovaria to it as well so that I get knockdown and residual protection.
So what I've done, because I'm cheap, if I'm being honest, and Bovaria is expensive and you have to get a lot of it. And with a small home grow, it's not as cost effective. I've had good success with Epishield and Sufoil X. And Sufoil X is also, again, I'm just going to say it again, Monterey Garden horticultural oil. So I bought mine. I can't remember if I got it on Amazon or Home Depot, but it's readily available. So I did applications of both of those things. Had my plants come in smaller, I would have done a dip at a dip rate, which is a lower concentration. You can't dip at full strength or you'll fry your plants. But Epishield, Sufoil X, and I did those to knock it down. So I did that for about 2 weeks. Every few days, 3 to 4 days, I do a spray. So I got like 4 to 6 sprays in. At that point, I'm not seeing any, and again, this is like 12 plants. So it's not, we're talking small scale here. Brandon's a much better option, especially for a commercial facility. But I'm able to get good coverage. The plants are small. It's not a large area. So I did that. And then I brought in beneficials. I had Brandon help me put together an order of beneficials because I figured, hey, if I'm gonna do this, I don't want to have to spray anything again. So I just timed the beneficials to arrive, and then I went with that through flower. Now, again, full disclosure, last cycle that didn't really work out for me. End of the cycle, I was like, oh, holy shit, these thrips are back, and they really took over. you can still harvest with thrips.
When you drove that harvest up,
Yeah.
you could literally shake buds as we were pulling them out, and they were dropping thrips like it almost looked like pollen.
Yeah, I had a lot of thrips that cycle. It was bad. The good news is with it is that they'll leave the plant, like they're not hanging out on the flower itself once that flower dies, or you're curing it, I guess. But it is going to affect its growth. Now, it's a stress event. Maybe I got better cannabinoids, terpene expression, that's secondary metabolites. But long story short, I didn't have good success with that. But I didn't grow then for a couple months, and all the thrips were gone this next cycle. So this next cycle, I got plants from someone. They said, hey, by the way, these plants are going to have root aphids and thrips, and they're all different genetics, which I thought I was getting 12 of the same plant, but that's another story. Long story short, I did the same. I didn't even do beneficials this round. I just did the Suffoil and the Epishield, and I can confidently say I have no thrips, visible thrips damage after a ton of scouting. And you just saw my plants. I'm pretty far into flower now. So that's been really good. So, I would say maybe my program is not 100%, but it worked pretty well for at least what I was dealing with in a tiny home grow. But they're persistent little buggers, and they are very successful strategies for staying alive. So, I
think any professional entomologist is going to tell you spinosad, whether that's
it's not allowed though in some, like if you're some states or commercial, you can't use it. But that is another good option, and it's a bacteria. It's safe, so that's another option too. But
but otherwise, I would go with Epishield and Bavaria if I wasn't using spinosad.
Right on. All right. Well, I think we pretty much covered it today. That was fun. All right. Appreciate everyone that tuned in.